Imagine being so poor that you lose both your parents before becoming a teenager. No money, no connections, no rich family. And somehow, you go on to create the most powerful luxury watch brand in the world. Today, people don't buy Rolex just to tell time. They buy it to show they've made it. But here's the crazy part. Rolex wasn't born rich. In fact, when Hans Wilsdorf started the company, people thought wristwatches were weak, feminine, and unreliable. Men used pocket watches back then. So how did one orphan change human psychology forever and convince millions that a tiny watch on your wrist could become the ultimate status symbol? Because Rolex didn't become successful by accident. It happened because of one genius strategy, a strategy luxury brands still copy today. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why Rolex is one of the few products in the world people desperately want, even when they can't afford it. Hans Wilsdorf was born in Germany in 1881, but tragedy hit early. By the age of 12, both his parents had died. He and his siblings were separated, and because there was no financial support, Hans had to grow up fast. He worked small jobs, learned business skills, and became obsessed with one thing: international trade, not watches, trade. That detail becomes important later. Eventually, he moved to London and got a job in a watch company. And this is where he noticed something strange. At that time, wristwatches already existed, but almost nobody respected them. People believed real men carried pocket watches. Wristwatches were seen as jewelry, weak, fragile, inaccurate. But Hans saw the future before everyone else. He believed people would eventually want convenience over tradition. So in 1905, with very little money, he started his own watch company in London, and that tiny company would later become Rolex. But there was one massive problem. Nobody trusted wristwatches. So Hans needed to solve a question nobody else could solve. How do you make people trust something they already think is inferior? Hans realized something critical. People don't trust advertisements, they trust proof. So instead of claiming Rolex watches were accurate, he decided to prove it publicly. At that time, precision mattered a lot. If your watch was inaccurate, it was useless. So Hans sent Rolex watches to official testing centers in Switzerland. And in 1910, Rolex became the first wristwatch in the world to receive a chronometer certification. Basically, Rolex proved a wristwatch could be as accurate as expensive pocket watches. This changed everything. But Hans didn't stop there, because accuracy alone doesn't create obsession. And Rolex wasn't trying to become good, it wanted to become unforgettable. So Hans pulled off another brilliant move, one that would change luxury marketing forever. In 1927, a young British swimmer named Mercedes Gleitzer attempted to swim across the English Channel. The water was freezing, the conditions were brutal. Most people didn't think she would succeed, but Hans saw an opportunity. He gave her a Rolex Oyster watch to wear during the swim. For over 10 hours, the watch stayed underwater. And when she finished, the Rolex still worked perfectly. The next day, Rolex placed a giant newspaper advertisement showing the successful swim. This was revolutionary. Today, influencer marketing is normal. Back then, nobody marketed products like this. Hans wasn't selling watches anymore. He was selling stories, adventure, achievement, human excellence. And slowly, Rolex stopped becoming a watch company. It became a symbol. Then came race car drivers, pilots, divers, explorers climbing Mount Everest. Rolex attached itself to winners. And something powerful happened psychologically. People began associating Rolex with success itself, not time, success. That's when the brand exploded globally. But there was still one final problem, and solving it would make Rolex nearly impossible to compete against. Most companies try to sell more products. Rolex did the opposite. It made itself harder to get. Over time, Rolex carefully controlled supply, stores had limited inventory, waiting lists became normal, and suddenly, buying a Rolex felt exclusive. This triggered something deep in human psychology. People value things more when they're difficult to obtain. Luxury is rarely about utility, it's about identity. A Rolex tells the world, I'm successful. And once celebrities, athletes, and businessmen started wearing Rolex, the brand became unstoppable. But here's the fascinating part. Even today, Rolex watches don't always have the most advanced technology. Many watches are technically more complex. Many are cheaper. Some are even more accurate. So why does Rolex still dominate luxury culture after more than 100 years? The answer is much deeper than watches, because Rolex mastered something almost no company truly understands: human desire. People don't buy Rolex because they need a watch. Phones already tell time. People buy Rolex because it represents something emotional: status, achievement, recognition. It became proof that someone made it. And that's why Hans Wilsdorf's greatest invention was never the watch itself, it was the perception. An orphan with no money managed to convince the entire world that time could become a luxury. And over 100 years later, millions of people are still chasing that feeling. Not because Rolex tells time better, but because wearing one tells a story about you. And that may be the most powerful brand strategy ever created. Because when you really think about it, Hans Wilsdorf didn't just build a watch company, he built an idea that success could be worn on your wrist. More than a century later, Rolex is still doing exactly what he intended: not selling watches, selling aspiration, selling achievement, selling a story people want to tell about themselves. And it all started with a young orphan who refused to accept the future life had handed him. A boy with no money, no connections, and no advantage. Yet somehow, he managed to create one of the most recognizable brands on earth. That's the power of understanding human psychology. And that's why the story of Rolex isn't really about watches at all. It's about perception. If you enjoyed this story and want to learn how the world's biggest brands were built, destroyed, and transformed, make sure to subscribe to Brand Simplified. Because behind every iconic brand, there's an even more fascinating story. And we'll see you in the next one.